There we go. All right, for those of you who attended the meditation this morning, thank you so much. The Alchemist is one of my favorites. It was one of the original meditations I purchased from Dr. Joe's collection, and it was the one I solely did for months because it was the only one I had. So that's what I did. That's really great for tuning into the void, tuning into the quantum field, the 0 point field, whatever you call it, whatever it is called for you. Thank you so much. Hello from Switzerland. So, and I'm Jan Wakefield. This is the second episode of Dimensional Talks with Jan Wakefield. And our discussion today is going to focus on origins. So for those of you who have not heard me speak yet, you have maybe not read the chat. We have wonderful discussions going there. I encourage all of you to participate in those discussions. Nothing is too weird to throw out in that discussion. Just go ahead and say it, ask it, share it. And remember that we're all here supporting each other in normalizing the conversation around interdimensional walking, talking to interdimensional beings, and sharing those experiences with one another so that we maybe could feel like we are in good company and sharing these things together. So in order to tell my origin story, which I always say is off planet, I have to go back to a little bit of my history in this lifetime, which would be around 2005. I was in a shamanic training program for 2 years. It was very intensive and it was wonderful. And during one of the early journeys, we called it, I now know that it's just going into the quantum field and looking for information. During one of those shamanic journeys, I went back in time to my original lifetime on this planet. What I found was that I traveled back 60 to 65,000 years, give or take 10,000 years. It was way back in time. And in the process of doing that journey, that past life regression, I'll call it, I followed a light cord. So it came out of the heart and I followed that light cord and tumbled back in time, holding on to that light cord as my guide, both back in time and then back to this physical body. So as good practice, when you are journeying through time, through past lives, you always want to go in one direction and come back the same way. So for those of you who have an underground or a subway, you want to ride one train all the way to the destination. You want to stay on that train and reverse it on the tracks. So whatever you do in those timelines, it's important to know that you go in the same way as you come back. Otherwise, it's tricky to unwind for energy healers. And that's a whole other discussion for another day. So I went back in this timeline, 65,000 years, give or take 10,000 years, and I found that I was a primitive human, and I looked odd, very tall, very thin, very, very not like I look right now, and not like humans look today. I had angular features, and I had a completely different feeling. So, of course, being a good student, my teacher was guiding us back to this original lifetime. I followed that light cord into the heart of a female human. As I said, very interesting looking, very slender, very much looked, now that I think back on it, like an insect, a giant insect. And the timeline went from the heart straight out through the top of the head of this individual and into the stars. And as I said, being a good student, I did what I was told. I went and found the original lifetime and let that whole other light thing go out into the cosmos and said to myself, well, that's really interesting. I'm not going there. And I came back, I reported to my group what I had experienced, did all the journaling and left it at that. Fast forward to 2021. So all those years of not checking that out, it didn't even cross my mind because I was working in different ways. I was working with a healer. As you all know, I had chronic migraines where I was pretty much in bed all the time when I wasn't physically working to make money to support myself and my son. And during that time, this healer met with me once a week. She would get me out of enough pain that I could get through almost to the next week. So I would last 4 or 5 days with a level 4 or lower pain level, which I called almost pain-free, which for most people would be a headache in bed and they wouldn't go to work. So I told her that story in one of the healings. I said, hey, this is really cool. This thing happened. We would just talk about anything and everything during my healing. She'd do the work and I would be in bed. And I told her the story and she said, hey, next time we get together, let's go back and find where that light cord goes. Let's go into the stars. And I thought, sure, why not? That sounds like fun. So we did. And she guided me back to that lifetime and I went off into the stars. And there I basically, you hear the terms on movies and things, wormholes or jump gates or things like that. It's essentially that there is this distance between two places and it kind of loops down in the middle and they go just next to each other. So you don't have to travel all those light years. So I found that I was originally from that light cord went to another planet in the Delphinius constellation. I went and did all the research after this experience, of course, and I came back to 3D world and I could get on the internet and do that with my brain. I discovered I was in the Delphinius constellation and I found the specific planet where it was from. And as I landed on that planet in this trance state of journeying in the quantum field, I landed on the planet, and of course you stop and you look around when you're in these experiences, and it was completely desolate and barren. The planet itself, it was like Arizona, a lot like Arizona where I live, but the kind of Arizona where nobody has a house because there's nothing there but sand and pretty much scrub, anything that can survive in that extreme heat. So I did see interesting buildings. They were kind of like turtle shells that were earth cast. So if any of you are familiar with Paolo Soleri's work, he was an architect from Italy, he moved to the United States and he did earth casting. So he built these massive mounds of dirt and then he poured the concrete over it and created these dwellings based on his vision. It was very much like that. They were earth cast buildings and structures that were, to keep it cool inside. They were all connected by tunnels, and I realized that actually people didn't live there. The beings of that planet did not live there. They were scientific research. They actually had setups for those who lived underground, which is where the dwellings were, to do adventures, kind of like we do adventures. They also had some sort of adventures they would do in some of these structures. There were spaceports, but this particular species did not have a military. There was no conflict. They didn't require any of that. It was purely a science-based civilization, and it was not even a thought in their consciousness or their awareness for hostility to exist. So they traveled some, but their ships, the devices they used for travel, and when they went in groups, were not designed to span the universe. So they weren't flying whatever these ships were to, say, Earth or other places, because they just had no use for that or any interest in that type of travel. I met with another being immediately on my arrival, and this person was my handler, essentially. See, I'm using human words to describe an experience. So just when you're drawing the images in your own mind, know that it's okay. Your pictures are just as valid. We don't have to be precise. So this handler proceeded to tell me that I'm going to call her a she, but gender is very neutral on this particular planet. She basically said she's been with me through all of my lifetimes as my guide, and most recently in this lifetime, and I'll explain how that came about and what her purpose was with this particular lifetime as Jan Wakefield. So I got a tour and had an experience and met people, and they explained to me in a lab that they do a lot of genetic work. So apparently what happened all those years ago when they sent me to Earth for kind of an experiment was that they cloned my being as a mantis being. So this is a mantis planet. And the people looked, I'm calling them people, they're mantis. They looked like giant praying mantises, essentially. And, but they were more humanoid, very slender, very much the way I saw myself in that journey back to my original lifetime on Earth. So I was in the lab with them and they explained that they had cloned me, my being that I was in that time on that planet, and time is not linear, so we can't imagine that it was 60,000 years ago, and I'll explain more about that as well. They cloned me, they preserved my original body, and in that clone, they spliced in human DNA. The reason they did this, and the reason I was sent on my mission, I guess is the only word I can think of, to Earth, was that this species had lost the ability to basically procreate. So as I drilled down more, they didn't need to, because the cloning process was really the only way that they would create new living beings on their planet. The planet itself was dying, and this more evolved species is symbiotic with its planet. And we are too, as they explained. However, humans have not yet come to the realization how important that symbiosis is. We have lots of discussions about it, and people are divided on this planet. But it is in fact true that all living things are in symbiosis with the planet upon which they live. And so their planet was dying, which meant that they were losing the ability to create new beings, and thus their species was dying as well. And so they had, as a science planet, they had many initiatives going in different directions, but I was just one of the initiatives, and I volunteered. It was a great honor for anyone to volunteer for any of these programs. And they spliced, as I said, cloned me as I was, as a mantis being, preserved that body, spliced in the human DNA, sent me to Earth in the hopes to gather information to bring back to the planet for how they could return to a dualistic nature. So for those of us who have been on spiritual paths for ages, since the birth in this lifetime, and we have been aiming for non-duality, there's the opposite side. So all things expand and contract in the universe, as we know. So they had basically taken non-duality to the point of extinction, which I find fascinating, because here we are all trying to be non-dual and they were trying to figure out a way to get back to it. So that was sort of my purpose, was to take this form, and they transported me by a jump gate, wormhole, or whatever you want to call that experience, and put me on Earth, where I met with primitive humans. That experience didn't go well, but that wasn't the point of it. The mantis beings speak through telepathy. They don't need language. However, true to the nature of mantis, it did have a language that it could use that was produced by clicks, squeaks, hisses, insect sounds, essentially. And I apparently was trying to communicate with those noises with the humans, and they were not receiving it well. They knew that I was different, of course, because anytime you throw a duckling that's been handled by a human back into its flock, it's rejected, right? So they knew something was off about this being that had arrived from somewhere else. And in trying to be helpful, one of the people in this human group, tribe, was injured and I healed them, which then further put me into suspicion. And then, of course, they just murdered me. And that was the end of it. So I was a part of the human tribe for a very, very short time before I was murdered, but it was enough to be recycled into the human realm of death and rebirth. And for the first few lifetimes as a human, I remembered my mantis roots. I could still relate to and communicate with my handler, who would come via telepathy, essentially. And then I couldn't after that. I fell asleep like all other humans do and traversed through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Karma, or whatever you call it, exercising my rights to beautiful and wonderful expressions of any DNA I picked up along the way, any experiences I shared with other humans, and essentially came to the being that I am now. Not long ago, though, within the last couple thousand years, the mantis research team realized that I wasn't evolving fast enough as a human. Humans are extremely slow to evolve, especially at that time. We're speeding up, of course, as you all know. So they spliced in some additional fifth dimension, I'll call it, or interdimensional DNA, including angel DNA. The angels are a separate species. Conversation for another time. And spliced in some angel DNA and a couple of others, including grays, which for those of you who don't know about the grays, they are probably the oldest species in the universe. And pretty much everyone in the universe has some gray DNA in there somewhere. So it did speed up the process in the last couple thousand years of my evolution, which led me to my most recent lifetime in Tibet. So my most recent lifetime before this one, I was a monk in Tibet. I've done a lot of past life regression. If anyone wants to know anything about that, you can ask me, and I'm happy to talk about it in another episode. So in Tibet, the lifetime just before this, I was a Buddhist monk, and I died in 1959. I was shot by a Chinese soldier. But I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that lifetime because it prepared me for this one and what brought me to be sitting here in front of all of you sharing this interesting story. So in Tibet, I was born to a very small village. I had parents and I had a brother. I was male in that lifetime. And when my brother and I were very young, there were bandits essentially that would go around and kind of rape and pillage. And our village was essentially attacked. My parents were murdered. And before my father died in that lifetime, he said to me, "Take your brother and run to the monastery." And so, of course, I was terrified and I was quite young. My brother was even younger. And I took off running and I assumed that he was following. And he had fallen behind because he didn't know what to do. He was scared. And in my panic, as I was running, I didn't stop to make sure he was with me. So I was quite a distance away when I turned around and realized that he was not with me. And in noticing that he wasn't with me, I had to make a choice. Do I run to the monastery or do I go back and get my little brother? Hang on, collecting emotions here. And so I left. I kept going. And I left him behind, which resulted in an agreement that I made with that brother to bring him back in this next lifetime to take care of him. And that brother is now my son. Oh. So I made it to the monastery, and in this lifetime, thank you, Connie. In this lifetime, I have learned that a lot about that experience with my son. Again, another story, another time. So I made it to the monastery. I was immediately accepted in. At the time, the monasteries were still very protected and very safe. They trained me into meditation and into experiencing what it means to be a monk in Tibet. And for those of you who know the history, most of those monasteries and the monks have been murdered, destroyed, and the Chinese have kind of taken over the direction of that story, that narrative. But how it was prior to the invasion of the Chinese into Tibet was that the monk's job was to transmute the karma of the world. So if you go back and you listen to any of the chanting, that deep, throaty, low chanting you hear in Tibetan chants, you can Google it and hear it, and they're still in the world today. That's what that's doing. It was designed to transmute the karma of the world to speed up evolution on this planet. I don't know that the Tibetan monks would say it exactly that way, so I'm using my own words, but that was the information I received when I went back and sat in that Tibetan monastery numerous times again and again in past life regression to sort of get more information about that lifetime. And in 1959, I went back and found the monastery in which I lived and where I was killed, and all the information on the internet. Thank you, internet, for being available for all of this. I was sitting in meditation, I was chanting, and the Chinese soldiers arrived. They came into the monastery, and an important part of meditation in those monasteries is to stay conscious throughout your life so that you can transition from one life to the next with awareness and make choices about where you go. So you may have heard these stories. If you haven't, I highly encourage you to check out any of the Tibetan lineages, the Tibetan Buddhist lineages. The one that is particularly interesting to me, and I've watched the documentaries, a lot of documentaries, in the one particularly about the Karmapa, which is their figurehead, their spiritual figurehead, and it's the Kagyu lineage. The Karmapas will leave clues, and same with the lamas, the high level lamas, they'll leave clues as to where they're going to be reborn. And it is the task of those who survive these lamas, the Karmapa, to find those clues, because they hide them, and read those clues, understand those clues, and then find the new incarnation. So if you watch the 16th Karmapa transition to the 17th Karmapa, this is the first time there was video footage of the 17th Karmapa's previous incarnation, and you see him as a child after he's located, and how quickly his memories return from being the 16th because he has video footage of himself. It's really fascinating to watch that information if it interests you at all. You might like it. Really, really wonderful and exciting to know that we have choice, right? That we can live consciously, meditate deeply, and when we choose to transition, however that may look at the end of this lifetime, that we can make choices about where we'll be reborn. So like you could pick conscious parents, that'd be really awesome. Rather than what happened to me in 1959, the Chinese soldiers came in and I stood up off my meditation cushion in shock. I looked him in the eye, and instead of holding myself in a place of compassion where I knew I should remain, I got angry, which changed the course of my transition. And it was a lot to be expected considering I wasn't an advanced Lama by any stretch of the imagination. I had not had many lifetimes as a Lama, and therefore I was still pretty new at it. So when I stood up with anger in my eyes toward the Chinese soldier, there was also recognition in him. He came in with anger, being told that he was to murder all of the monks in the monastery for whatever reason, and he bought into that story. But the moment he pulled the gun and his eyes locked with mine, he was afraid. He was really afraid. And we locked eyes. He felt afraid. I felt angry. The gun went off and shot me in the chest, directly in the heart, and I died instantly. A nanosecond after that happened, I felt compassion because I recognized just as I was dying that we were both playing a little bit of a game. I was playing the monk in the monastery game, and he was playing the Chinese soldier killing people game, the war game. And so when I tumbled from 1959 into my current life in 1969, it was jarring, it was shocking, it was unexpected, and I didn't have a choice, which I'm hoping for at the end of this lifetime, there will be some choices involved. So I ended up with some pretty wacky parents. For those of you who read a little bit about my story in the I Am Frequency chat, it wasn't as exciting or wonderful or as delightful as being a monk. I really enjoyed being a monk. I enjoyed being in the monastery, and I've spent a lot of this life trying to recreate that, trying to find my way back to spiritual connection. So I have been driven my entire life since I was a very, very young child to seek spirituality. And I think it has a lot to do with that lifetime. In addition, it also awakened me. I burned a lot of my own karma in the lifetime as the monk. So when I came into this lifetime, my handler was with me at birth. I was taken from my mother at birth because she was sick. And in 1969, they did not have the awareness, the intelligence, or whatever, and it's all okay, to know that you can't separate a baby from its mother that early on without some psychological consequences. Very fortunately, I was sent home with a loving grandmother who was my guide for many years of my life and eventually and still is one of my spirit guides. So there was a reason and a purpose for that. However, I didn't have a really strong connection, a maternal bond to my mother, never nursed a day in my life, didn't have that warmth and connection, which has been has created a situation where I'm not as sentimental or not as emotionally attached to a lot of things that maybe other people are. It also sent me to spirituality, and in regressions in this lifetime, when I went back to being that baby in the bassinet in 1969 to a loving grandmother who also was taking care of my 3-year-old sister and my 6-year-old brother. So she was tired and busy, right? And she would say to me later in my life, my grandmother said, "You thought you were going to cry and keep me up all night." And I thought, well, I was probably starving because infants can only hold so much food in their bellies to survive, a few hours at a time. And so, of course, that wasn't common knowledge at the time. So I cried a lot. And in that, my handler was picking me up. So my mantis handler was in the room picking me up. When I first was taken back to those memories in this lifetime, and as you know, anything to do with hypnosis, your memories are all in there somewhere. They're all encoded in your DNA. So whether or not we remember our life experiences from the time we're born until we're 5, when we fully incarnate into our bodies in human development, we're probably about 7 years old. That's why memories generally start in earnest around the age of 7. It has to do with the changing of the teeth. It's right around that time. So right when the top front ones start coming in is when the human has made the choice to fully incarnate into the body and be here and stay kind of in that asleep, quasi-asleep state, and we lose the dreamscape that we live in as the early young child. So when I went back to those memories, as an adult, I did rebirthing. It was very few years of rebirthing where I was in a hot tub with a snorkel in the birth experience over and over again. So I'd seen those memories again and again, and I thought it was my grandmother sitting there crocheting, the needle, the yarn, because she did crochet. And then as I went back more recently, I noticed it was Mantis hands. She was insectoid. And I thought, that's interesting. So once I started recalling the memories of the Mantis experience and what my purpose was when I was sent here, all those memories shimmered and adjusted in this lifetime to include that image. But because my brain didn't have those images, it slotted in what was familiar. So when the Mantis handler was holding me as an infant so that I would not essentially lose my mind as a human, she had kind of broken the rules, which was then forgiven later, being that it all turned around in this lifetime very quickly for me and for that experience of gaining or gathering the information that they needed and returning it in this lifetime. So she was holding me. I had the experience of being loved and remembering those roots, my experiences of kind of coming here as an experiment. And all of these memories returned between 2021 and today. And they still keep coming back. And I shared this story once before with that healer I worked with. She wanted me to share it with her group. And my resistance to being so unusual and sharing this story from the heart as a memory or an experience I've had in trance, whichever story works best for you, go ahead and keep that one. That recording was deleted. It just vanished, like gremlins ate it from her computer, essentially, and it was lost. So this is the first time I'm sharing the story again and recording it so that I have a record of it for writing it down more. I have all these things written down anyway, but I'm creating a manuscript of all these experiences. So from my early childhood with the handler, I then, of course, lived in a very traumatic experience. And I think it was necessary to provide me with the ability to fracture that place where humans fall asleep. And we see this a lot. My guru used to say, there are lots of blind Homo sapiens in the world, and many of them are lovely people. And what he meant by that was humans fall asleep and they live in that slumber. And all you have to do is turn on the television and watch the news to see the sleeping humans. And I say that with a little bit of humor because I fall asleep sometimes too, right? We slip in and out of that awareness because it's super familiar, and those patterns are exactly why we meditate, to get into the quantum field so that we can experiencing nothingness in order to create something different. So I would call myself still a work in progress, but I've come a long way since I was a child where I had no choices. For those of you who did not read that post, okay, I grew up with a narcissist parent who was very emotionally abusive. In addition to that, I suffered several years of sexual abuse from a person in my neighborhood who molested all the children in the neighborhood. And that was, those memories didn't return for me in this lifetime until I was in my 40s, when I had total recall after coming out of a surgery. And so a lot of the reasons that we fall asleep, I think, have to do with just the fact that human Evolution is a little slower. Our 3D bodies are very heavy, they're very dense. We're earthbound, which is wonderful. But those of us who are seeking higher levels of consciousness or evolution, we feel that heaviness and like to go into the void so that we can have a lightness, a sense of lightness, and just being free of all this physical stuff, particularly the mind, right? Because we're very cerebral species. We love our thoughts, and we get trapped in the brain for hours, weeks, days. And in meditations, I'm sure all of you have that moment where you're like, why am I thinking about the grocery list right now, or doing laundry? It's like, go away. So yeah, lately I've been saying no, thank you. No thanks. Don't need to have that thought right now. So coming back to the mantis experience, I'm going to fast forward through a lot of details and just say that in 2022, I had so many downloads from that experience that I was given the opportunity to go back through the wormhole, back through the jump gate, back to the planet, and to share that information because we had cracked the code. I can't say I know exactly what it was, but they knew apparently that we had cracked the code. And so when I went back, it was a transference of energy where I put my forehead to my handler's forehead. And it's fascinating because in Hawaii, that's a very common way of greeting is to exchange ha or breath, where you put your forehead to another person and you breathe. And I was exchanging ha with the mantis being, and it transmitted the information from her to every other being on that planet. And they were simply informed. So when the information went from me to them, while it's very challenging to get energetic telepathy, I'll call it, from human to human, right? I don't know if any of you have practiced. I certainly have. My poor children along the way. That was sort of the games we played over dinner, was reading each other's thoughts. They loved it though. I shouldn't say poor. They really did love it. When I downloaded that information, or they extracted that information from me, it was instantaneous, it was quick, it was painless, and it went out like an electric blue bolt of light from my forehead to hers, and then they were all kind of touching each other in a way, like their energies are always connected, so it just zoomed out through everybody. And then I was sent home. I was sent back here. And I was like, no, I don't want to go. I was gonna just hang here. This is so much easier. But back to Earth I came and have done the human thing for the last, 2 years, 2.5 years. And found Dr. Joe's work doing meditations about March of 2023. And pretty much after I started doing the meditations daily, I started reconnecting with fifth dimension beings in earnest. I have hundreds of stories I could share, but those are for another day. And in experiencing all of those stories, I call it recall, memory recall. I'm just bringing back all the knowledge that I had to begin with to share it with all of you. And I think that's part of my purpose here. And during the summer last year of 2023, I was brought back again to the mantis people one more time. Remember, time is not linear for them. And I was taken to essentially a space station is what it felt like. It was a giant ship they all lived on. They had to evacuate the entire planet because it collapsed. There were no longer resources, and they were trying too hard to make it work. So they were living, the rest of the species had moved to the space station. Again, my words, I don't know what they call it. And I arrived in kind of a teleport, is what it felt like. And I was walking down what looked like a hallway to a room, and I noticed a very interesting drawing on one of the walls. And I thought, "Oh, that looks really childlike." It looked like a child's drawing. And of course, I'm cataloging in my mind. You're always telescoping back and forth when you're having these experiences between your human brain and what's happening in your human experience, and then what's happening where you're going. So my thoughts don't stop. I stay in the quantum, but they're rapid. They're literally like fairy dust that come through my mind. So I had that thought, and a doorway opened, and I walked through, and there were actually mantis children in this room. And I thought, well, that's new, because they had not procreated in that way for many, many, many generations, that they were just cloning and transferring consciousness from one body to the next. So when one body would show signs of wear and tear, rather than continuing to heal and heal and heal, they would just clone it in its pure form and transfer the consciousness, and that being would continue on with their work. So when I saw these young children, they all knew who I was. It was really bizarre because I thought I was presenting myself as a human, but I was apparently, to their eyes, they were seeing me in my mantis form. And so the children all knew who I was, and it was overwhelming because they were all touching me and coming and, and talking to me. And I thought, I'm really uncomfortable with all of this because my human side is I'm very inward. I'm an introvert. It's hard for me to put myself like that type of attention on me. And so they said, okay, you've earned your ticket back. You can leave your human life immediately if you'd like. They had preserved my original form, so they would clone back into my original form and transfer consciousness. And I said, will I keep all my human memories? For some reason, that was important to me. And they said, for a little while. And then, like, as it was with becoming human, I forgot after a period of time. And I thought back to my son. And I have a granddaughter now, and I was like, nope, I'm not ready. I have too much I want to do here on this planet, particularly with my little granddaughter. And I have a passion for working with youth in helping to keep them awake and aware of their abilities or the truth of who they are before they fall asleep into the world, which we all do, so that we can play those games, right? The human games, the work game, the relationship game, the politics game. They're all these interesting games. And I use those terms based on Hank Wesselman's book. If you haven't read his book, he talks about the games, the human games. So really a wonderful opportunity for me to continue to stay here. Don't know if I'll stay past this lifetime, but I have been given the grace of being here for as long as I like. And my plan is to live to be until my granddaughter is 60 years old. That's the information I've gotten. That would make me 111. So I'll see y'all there, all you young people who are going to be around still. I'll see y'all when I'm 111. I'll still be here. Because my granddaughter came to me when I was 35. I was pregnant. I had a miscarriage at 14 weeks. And at that point, I decided that I would do my spiritual work, this type of work, sharing with people, and that she could join me through my children. And sure enough, my son got married to a woman who was never supposed to have children. She was told 7 years before that she would not have kids and to plan to adopt. So they got married, and 2 weeks later, she was pregnant. So now I have this wonderful, beautiful mini me expression of myself who looks like me, talks like me, acts like me, thinks like me. Her poor parents. But she is the light of my life right now, and it's wonderful to be inspired. She loves to meditate with me, sit on my lap. Every night I bring her into my meditations. I hold her. She lives in Arizona. I live in Hawaii. And every morning I ask her, did you have any dreams? And she said, I dreamed that you were in my room snuggling with me last night. That's what what she says. So she's still really tapped in. I'll know that when she starts telling me about other dreams that she's beginning that process of incarnating into the human body and leaving the dream world behind. It is my hope to understand a little bit better how to keep that activated in her without severe trauma, like it did for me. That's how it worked for me. So no regrets there either. I still have contact with the Manus Planet and my handler. She has an actual name, which I'm not going to bother mentioning at this time. So in addition to that, I do a lot with mystical meditations and getting back into the mystical. It is a place where I'm very familiar. So I will continue sharing with all of you the stories that I have. And in addition to that, I'm writing it all down because I figure it's easier to publish a manuscript with all of these details that people can read at their leisure. I'm one person, you're many, and I love all of you. And I love your questions, and I promise I will answer all of them. And if I ever forget or miss any of them, just repost them. It's simply because we're on totally different time zones for most of you who are in Europe. We're exact opposite. I'm sleeping when you're posting to me, and I'm answering everything when you wake up. So my most recent contact, of course, is with the Blue Healers. I have a lot of communication with them, particularly the ones I saw at the Advanced Follow-Up Retreat in Marco Island, Florida, that I attended with Dr. Joe Dispenza. For those of you who don't know who that is, feel free to Google. Many of you do his meditations as well, and we all dance around in the quantum together, which is amazing. So the Blue Healers that I have been most recently in contact with are giving me a lot of information. And they are now showing up in my space when I call them. Again, as you know, and Dr. Joe Dispenza has talked about this as well, frequency has to be raised high enough for us to get out of our 3D reality just enough to recognize they're here with us, they're talking to us, and they have a lot to say. So in the next episode, I'm going to share my most recent experience. That was just a few days ago, where I did the meditation synchronizing your energy to the mystical. Nope, that wasn't the one. I did Blessings of the Energy Centers, Body Electric. My all-time favorite is Body Electric Anything. And for those of you who saw my pictures for the advanced follow-up, when I dressed as my future self for the advanced follow-up reception, I was the Body Electric. And that was my costume. So I'm going to go ahead and answer questions, and I'm going to be mindful of the time. Last time we were on for a couple hours, and I know that's a lot. It's very fatiguing, and I will, for those of you waiting for the recording, I'm having somebody else help me chop that up a little bit, so people don't have to sit for 2 hours listening to it. There are very distinct areas that can be broken out, so I'm working on that. So give me just a second, and I will share the recording in the group, the Dimensional Talks with Jan Telegram group. That's the only place I'll probably share it. It will also, in addition, be on my YouTube channel, and people can access it there as well. And you can share it. Okay, how do or did they add those types of DNA from Ezra? Let me see if I can remember. It was done in a lab. So when they are cloning and creating a physical body, I think the closest thing I can come to is the movie Avatar. If you've seen the movie Avatar, if you haven't, check it out. It's interesting. Where they basically took DNA from a human. I don't want to know how they got that DNA. I'm not sure. I could ask, but I don't know, and I have not asked. I don't really have the interest in knowing that right now. And they mix it with some of their own DNA. So they took the DNA of the being that I was on that planet at that time, and they took DNA from that and DNA from the human, and they basically created it in a lab, in a petri dish. And from there, they have ways of regrowing the bodies and doing it very quickly. It's almost like it's 3D printing, essentially. It's an energetic 3D printing. We definitely don't have that technology. I know there's technology now to 3D print organs. You can Google that. That's happening on Earth. They're having trouble, though, getting those organs to function in physical bodies. And there's also research here on Earth where if they take cells from a kidney or a liver or whatever, they can actually grow another one. So I've seen that. I've also seen where they've regrown human ears and implanted them in humans. So this technology is emerging on the human planet. So it's not beyond belief that they could 3D print, energetically 3D print a whole new body, which is what they did. And it takes a lot less time for them than it does for us here on Earth with the research I've done about growing organs and 3D printing organs and human matter. So it's coming. So then they have a process by which they insert the consciousness so they can pull it out of one and insert it into the other body. That I know very little about, but it's basically like a computer download. And I don't know exactly how they hook it up. Probably don't need to do anything, but just it's an energetic transfer. So when I have more information about that, I will definitely share it. Crystal, so interesting. You talk about rebirthing. I was going to ask you about whether you have a rebirthing technique, practices you work with in your practice. Would be interested in doing this in person one day in an earth, water-based way would be amazing. Yeah, create it. Crystal, I'd say create it. That sounds like it'd be great. Yeah, rebirthing I did 30 years ago. It was one of my first healing practices when I left home and I went directly into therapy by the grace of God. Went directly into therapy when I was 18 years old, and I've had weekly sessions nearly every week for my entire adult life. I still go today because there's so many human things to just unwind. Rebirthing was great in that it put me in the quantum field and I didn't know it at the time. And we used to use a breathwork technique to get there if we weren't in the hot tub itself. In the hot tub, we'd do the same breathwork technique, but it's different. Where, how Dr. Joe Dispenza does the inhale, exhale, and we would do that for like 2 minutes straight, to the point where like my whole face would go numb from the hyperventilation, essentially the breathing technique. And we would do the breathing technique, and if we were in the tub, we didn't always get in the tub because, of course, you could do the rebirthing and the breathing techniques with a massive group. Whereas a hot tub, you need one facilitator, one person. So we would only do the hot tub version every quarter because we'd have to take turns doing that. We were a pretty big group. But in the tub, I would definitely go back into the womb, and I had clear memories, and I was piecing together my whole birthing experience because we learned from this rebirthing facilitator that how you are born is how you live your whole life. So ask your mom if she's still around, or if you don't know the story, ask, how was I born? What was it like? My story is my mother had zero contraction pain at all, no pain. She had no idea it was coming because she didn't have contractions. She just felt pressure on her perineum. And so I was almost born in the back of a station wagon on the way to the hospital. And I was literally being born on the gurney, she said, as she was being wheeled into the birthing room. This is 1969. You can imagine how different it was in those days than it is now. But I literally rocketed into this lifetime. My mom said she was holding me in so that they could get to the doctor, because it was just the EMTs essentially who were getting her back there, the nurses who were wheeling her back there. So that's been my whole life, zooming out into things in really spectacular and wonderful ways. And then, of course, my story, I said just a little earlier about not having that connection with my mother and how that brought me to being this wonderful person that I am today. I'm very appreciative of all those experiences. See if there's any truth in that to you. I'd be curious to know your stories as well. If you want to share them, put them in the chat about rebirthing. I have not known another rebirthing practitioner since then. I know they're out there. I imagine just Google. But I have done a lot of hydrotherapy where you do cold dip, warm dip, shower, sauna, etc. Very popular in Europe. For many years, I had a sauna in my house and a dip tub out in the winter cold where I'd break the ice on the tub to get in. And those experiences of going through those, you can use your intention and actually use that as a way to get into the quantum field. And for those of you going to Cancun, there's one of these hydrotherapy experiences there. I highly recommend that you pay to do it, if not once or twice, a few times, but there is a freezing cold dip tub in that resort. So check that out. I did use that in conjunction with Dr. Joe's meditations during that last retreat in Cancun in June. So that's about, let's see if I answered everything. Yeah. And then there's the ocean. So anyone near the ocean, put on your snorkel, head out there and do the meditation in your mind. And you can definitely have those experiences as well. It's easy to get there once you know your way to the quantum field, which most of you who have done meditation know that way. Okay, did I find the cause of my migraines? Great question. Stress response is what I would say. I had a way of dealing with the world, in the human world, the human game of the narcissist. So as you might imagine, you leave a relationship with a parent who's a narcissist. It forms how you think. It changes your brain development in so many ways that I then married that. I married that experience and recreated it in friendships. And when I was young, as you know, I'm very tough to somehow survive all of that. And it wasn't until my 40s where that was slipping a little bit. I wasn't able to keep up the incessant stress response that I was addicted to, those chemicals in my brain, and therefore the sheath on my nerves were beginning to take a hit. And I became more like a raw nerve, which is migraine is a neurological condition that for me was triggered by that stress response. So once I uncovered that and the trauma around it and did a lot of EMDR, I did straight EMDR for probably 10 or 11 months of weekly EMDR to work through all the trauma around growing up with a narcissist, sexual abuse, etc., and the stress response that I had created in myself. Unfortunately, there was a lot of damage done in my body that didn't heal until really recently, and I wasn't 100% pain-free until I did the retreat with Dr. Joe Dispenza in Cancun, Mexico in June, and where I sat in on the coherence healings as a healer, and by just being in the field, healed myself. I also did a direct coherence healing with one of the certified groups from Dr. Joe Dispenza's website in June, the 26th of June of this year, and that additionally helped. I continue to work on that because I am tapping into the sensitivity of my nerves or my nervous system, because that is what connects into the quantum field, using the pineal gland as a conduit. And I'm practicing more and more trying to use my entire physical body rather than just the nervous system. As a side note, I forgot to mention that the mantis beings, and this is important, when I check in with interdimensional beings, their skeletal structure, organ structure is extremely different from ours. And so when tapping into that, I realized the one thing we do have in common is a brain and a nervous system. Theirs is very different than ours. Ours is more pronounced. Our nervous system goes throughout the body, whereas their nerves coming out of their, I want to call it a spine, but it's not exactly that. It's just a channel where the information goes from their brain down into the rest of the body. They're what look like nerves to me. These little conduits are very short, whereas ours kind of snake out in all directions. So not sure why I had to add that in, but just wanted to tell you that part. It'll come back around when I talk about the blue beings as well, because they showed me exactly how they're held together They don't have a skeletal structure like we do, and they don't have organs like we do. All right, Ezra says, why is it that human beings sleep and we have to put in work to awaken? How and why did that start? Great question. I think in the formation of the universe, I like to go back to the Big Bang theory. Cool stuff happened that came from that pinpoint of nothingness into the expansion of everything. And as I'll say again and again in talks, the world expands and contracts. It happens on all levels, right? So we are in an expansion phase of this universe, but from theory, and don't know if it's true or not, we'll reach a point of expansion where then the whole thing will contract in, bang, start over. And I think that from the travels I've done interdimensionally, the experiences that I've happened to have along the way, the human experience is very unique. I have not seen anything like it in my travels to date. Granted, I probably have a lot less experience than some of the other channels who have been 30 years in the process, but I'll be here till 111, so I'll keep you posted along the way. But I do believe that the Earth is unique in its diversity. Many of the other planets that I've seen or visited, or the space stations where I've encountered interdimensional beings in conferences, etc., is that they find the Earth, the complexity or the diversity of the Earth with the number of insects and animals and plants, and just the uniqueness of all of it, and the fact that we live on top of the planet rather than inside it is unique in the near universe. And my understanding is there are rules. The reason the mantis beings did not interfere with me along the way, except to sort of push the scientific project forward a little more quickly, is that there are actual rules from planet to planet about interaction and what you can do. Of course, not all species are benign or benevolent. So there is conflict that does happen, but there are rules about what they can and cannot do with humans and other species from other planets. And generally they honor and respect that. I believe that our evolution takes a long time because we are literally made up of Earth. We're made up of this planet. And perhaps all other species, I had the feeling on the mantis planet that it was the same for them, and that they had exhausted all the resources in their evolutionary process, and it became barren, and so did they. So barren planet, barren internally. So they were unable to procreate, and it was just a life cycle, nothing personal. Like on the Earth, we like to get very personal, I think, about raping and pillaging the planet, and using up all the valuable resources. Those narratives that we have are interesting, and it if the focus were to go inward on developing an inner world that is compassionate, loving, caring, kind, then there would not be these external issues. The external appears, in my opinion, in the human realm externally because it is unresolved internally, and that pretty much every experience we have is a little like a hologram, right? Because if you know this, we intersect and see things in similar ways, but the ways our cultures may describe things can be very different, and we may learn to understand one another, but our unique vision of the world cannot be seen by anybody else until we are of a level of evolution where telepathy is the way we communicate. Because there's so much more to the experiences, the internal experiences we're having, and through the visual abilities, which is super cool, but not as complex as just getting the information in a full body communication that we humans call telepathy. And I think too, humans erroneously believe that telepathy is like, I'm going to send my thought out through my third eye see your third eye, and it's going to be exactly in your head the same way it is in mine, which is not how it works. Their version of telepathy is literally, it's an emanation of energy from their physical being energetically to the other person. So it's whole and complete, and you get the entire message, not just a thought. I hope I answered that question. Gosh, I think I went off on a tangent. Sorry. I hope it was helpful. Did I answer the question? Let's see. Sleep, and Ezra, I'm looking back at it. Awaken. Yeah, again, that awakening process, we've been talking about that a lot in the chat. I'd love to continue that conversation about what your perceptions are of how humans are awakening. But in truth, I really believe that awakening for me, and what I've seen in a lot of other people in my life, is that trauma, unfortunately, can be a way that people awaken. I have not yet met someone who has begun the awakening process in the human body without having some form of trauma. So if any of you have had that experience, tell me all about it in the group chat, because I would love to hear about that. And I really wish I could take down data and make this scientific research, but you've got to find a lab who's willing to do that, right? Okay. How does a download look like? I think I just described that. It comes in a package of energy. It's literally, I work with downloads generally with my breath, because it is a human faculty. So I'll take it in as a breath, almost like pulling in that whole body image, the feelings, the sensation, all at once. And so a download might come where I get one piece of information, like the image of a being in its outer appearance and how it's showing itself to me. Or it may be 1,000 years of information that all comes in at once. And then it slots into my human brain in memory form, finding, just like a computer, finding categories where it's going to go. And for anyone who's had memory recall, from, memories lost, it's the same kind of thing. It's like suddenly you recognize memory is in a place that wasn't there before. So if you need more information, just let me know. I'll see if I can explain it better. Okay, I've had lots of mystical experiences since I was young. While I do feel myself expanding in my journey, I still feel like the experiences are a bit of my control and sometimes don't know what to trust. How do you add intentionality in your communication? Okay, these are two separate questions. B, thanks for your question. And yeah, I like to say all life is a balance of effort and surrender. And yes, you are going to dance around with that human part, and you are going to try to push and demand and pull and seek and find and reach as a human for all this stuff. And that's okay. Keep doing it. Yeah, because nobody did anything amazing without doing that, right? All the amazing stuff that we do in our lives comes from us tripping our way into it, right? Not like LSD, but like literally stumbling and falling. LSD might have worked too. That's okay. But tripping our way into the experience. So let it be awkward, let it feel uncomfortable. There are no rules around any of this. If you are just beginning to acquire information from the fifth dimension and from the quantum field, where it's like a lot, I would say just surrender. And I know that's impossible. God, I used to hate when people would say that to me. So let me try again. Say something else. Taking what you can take in at the time. And anything that is too far-fetched, like I have people reach out to me and say, I'm just so afraid. I'm like, be afraid. It's totally okay. Healthy skepticism is a good thing. We don't want to throw ourselves into a burning building if we're not ready to make a save. Go in and get it. And that's okay. Because it'll keep coming. And the more you relax into and grow into yourself and whoever you might be becoming, your level of authenticity will win out, so long as you keep directing your energy there. And don't worry if it feels like you're faking it. Write that stuff down too, because when you go back over it days, weeks, months, years later, you'll be like, okay, there is truth in all of this, but maybe I added in a little human layer so that I could make sense of it in my head in the moment. And it does make a good narrative. If we share these stories, we do have to use our human filters so that we can explain things in a way that people understand. Well, I could certainly sit here for an hour and transmit the information, but I'd say that 99.9% of people are not going to get any of it. So it's okay. Just be easy on yourself. And what do you trust? Trust all of it and don't trust any of it at the same time. I know that sounds bizarre, but it's like it's okay to be curious about your own thoughts. And it's okay to say to yourself, I think I'm full of SHIT. It's okay to say that. And trust yourself anyway, and then don't trust yourself, and then trust yourself. It's all okay. And when I say that, it'll all work out. It does tend to, it's like panning for gold, you know? Eliminate the water and the sand around it and pull out the gold nugget and go, oh, okay, all that other stuff, you know, and just keep panning for gold in your own world. We all have unique experiences, and I think it's important that we bring that forth as authentically as possible. You can hear my stories, and my hope is, again, that I am holding a space in communication with 5D where you sense and feel it, and something I say or some feeling I am putting off will resonate in you, and it'll open that doorway a little wider for you to walk through and authentically have these conversations with me or with anyone else, so that we don't have to be afraid, oh, I'm going to lose my job if I talk about aliens, I'm going to lose my relationship if I tell my husband I'm from another planet. Or whatever the fear or the story is in your brain. It's like when you're ready to authentically jump into your own uniqueness, you will. And if my husband wants to leave, you know, or your husband wants to leave, or wife, or whatever, because I am proclaiming I'm, you know, I'm sharing these experiences, which are true memories for me. It's my reality, you know, and yeah, enjoyed the journey with you. It's okay. Yeah. My story corroborates the book by Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls. I will read that. I love when y'all send me these things because there's so much out there that I haven't read, and I deliberately do not read a lot of things about this because I want to have my own experiences without being influenced by what I'm experiencing or reading on the outside. That's just me. Other times I will be called to, like, one of you will send me an article or a book, and I'll be like, nope, I absolutely have to read that. And for me, I download information. So an example would be Messages from Spirit by Colette Baron Reed. She's a famous psychic in the United States. If you haven't read her book, I found that one pretty interesting. But I could only get about 2/3 of the way through it because she was downloading it, and it was just downloading into my brain. And I was like, okay, this book is now wearing me out, you know? And I passed it on to somebody else, but I was like, I got the message of what it means to be psychic. I get it. And for anyone who can move between the worlds out of 3D, you are psychic. And that term doesn't need to be used, but it just means that you can collect information for other people that they can't see or feel or hear right now. So thank you for Journey of Souls. I'm going to read that for sure. How do we know which beings are not good? Sue, great message. It is true, there are not good beings out there. I was going back through my notes prior to bringing this story to you today, and I discovered that I wrote a note, avoid reptilians at all cost, right? And we were just talking about this, you know, where it's like, how do I know what to trust in myself? So there are a lot of reptilian species that are not very kind. There are also Nordics who are not very kind. There are pretty much, I did a healing with a guy who said, you're from a mantis planet? All the ones I've ever had contact with were just horrific. And I was like, not my experience. So, you know, seek out the information and you will know the ones that are not good. They'll mess with you a little bit. So they'll keep showing up in your dreams, or if you have an experience with one of them and then your dreams just start getting a little dark or a little funky, or you start feeling like someone's looking over your shoulder, your body will start giving you cues. The human body's wonderful that way. It'll be like, hey, knock knock, you know, you're not feeling okay with this. Trust that intuition. And there are rules. Again, I'll say it again and again. There are rules about what they can and cannot do with you. Just say, I know the rules. Please go away. Okay. And if you continue to have troubles, then that's an affinity within that we talked about that has to do with healing energetically, that internal affinity, which is where I told the story about having demonic possession, because yeah, that's a whole interesting story that I'll tell another time. Took me 18 months to get rid of that one. So yeah, trust your intuition and be willing to say no. But don't assume they're all bad, because that's definitely not the case. Would I say something about energy vampires? I think that's vampires, yes. Yeah, they exist, energy vampires. I find more that human dead people who are hanging around suck the energy out of me more than anything else, and humans themselves who are living in their own hologram of hell that they are trying to drag everyone else into. So we all know those people. Some of us are related to those people. Those are the energy vampires that are, you want to just make real human boundaries. It's okay. I didn't speak to my mother for more than 20 years for good reason. She was on her meds, she was off her meds, she was on her meds, she was off her meds. Personality disorders have a low success rate in therapy. And yeah, it was just really difficult because every time, being that she was my mother and I shared her DNA so closely, every time I was in communication with her, I would just feel exhausted and I'd be that abused child again and did not enjoy that feeling. So I had to really do my personal work and come through it and get rid of that affinity for, and that's a deep one. Anyone who's in your biological family like that, your immediate family, those are very tricky relationships to not automatically go back there, because it's like a trail. If you go hiking, you hike it again and again. Eventually, you don't think about it. You go from point A to point B without watching your step, right? You know the way. And it's the same with your biological family. You know the way to those experiences, and it's very easy to find yourself back there without a automatic, like without thinking about it at all. So energy vampires, it is an internal thing. The more you trust yourself, the more you clear your energy, the more you stay in the void, the more you're having more authentic experiences of who you really are, your soul or your spirit calling, your soul purpose, the less these vampires will have an effect on you. Also, it's just, I really, really recommend paying attention to what sucks your energy away. So for me, there was a long time where I couldn't go to malls. Walmart was my ultimate nightmare. Seriously, I do not like places like that where they're just a lot of people. Costco's another one, just where it's very crowded. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of fluorescent lighting. All of these things are energetic impacts on your body and on your spirit body or your energy body. And if we aren't mindful of how much is impacting us in the moment, then that's when we're more susceptible. Because the physical body and the energy body is trying really hard just to sort it all out. It's just information overload. It's like your computer. You probably had this happen. Your computer, you leave all the tabs open for too long and you don't do a restart. What's it do? It starts glitching on you until eventually it shuts itself down. And you're like, oh, I have to find all those logins again, or whatever your thing is. It's the same with the body. It's a little like a computer. So energy vampires have a lot to do with our awareness. I also really, really, really want to explain at some point in time, but I'll mention it briefly right now, is that we have impression food, is what I call it, right? So what we watch, what we experience, what we allow into our energy body is just as important. I drive an electric car. And I recently, and I've had electric cars for a long time, it was out of having migraines because there's less vibration frequency and noise associated with electric cars. But I recently was traveling and I rented a car and I had to get gas. I went to the pump and I put the thing in, I pull this handle up, and then all of a sudden the screen on the pump starts talking. It's advertising, and I'm thinking, I just want 5 seconds to pump gas without being told something, like, leave me alone, or you're on a bus or you're in a subway. It's like we're being bombarded constantly. So just being mindful, like, of where these things are coming from is the most important in avoiding energy vampires. In addition to that, I I know people who are really interested and love horror films, horror movies, and I don't personally watch them. I can't. I don't want, and also the reality television. I don't watch any of that either because I don't want those images or that information, that reality in my mind. I'm very creative, very imaginative, and I also, my veils are very thin, so information comes into me as reality and lodges itself in here as a memory. And sometimes I'll close my eyes and images from that movie, or even like I don't want to see images of people's wounds, open wounds. I don't want to hear drug commercials. I don't want to know the information. I know a lot of information. I Google all that stuff a lot because I'm like, well, what is that thing, But I often will avoid imagery because once the image is in my mind, it comes back up again. And just so you know, the reason I ended up with demonic possession had to do with the fact that my mother, I love her very much. She will come up a lot in my stories, though. When I was about 6 years old, The Exorcist came out. Of course, I was raised Catholic up until I was 7 or 8 when I quit the church. And she thought, and she tells me that the doctor told her, which I don't believe that's true, that children couldn't process those images. So she had me watching The Exorcist because she was a young mother and she wanted to see it herself. So I was freaked out, as you can imagine. It's a terrifying film. It was the original of a young girl being, possessed by the devil and a priest going in and exorcising it out. And I slept for a long time with a crucifix. And when I went back to a priest about demonic possession, I put that in air quotes. It's a phrase that you all understand. However, it was more complex than that. He said that I was explaining my life, and he said, his intuition was basically saying that opened a gateway or a doorway for demons to come in. Demons are a thing. There are energetic demons that do float around, and there are energetic things that are disembodied that will suck your energy. Do not be afraid. I know that sounds ridiculous, but don't be afraid. Fear is our worst enemy. It really is. These things just exist. It's kind of like walking by an undesirable out on the street, someone who maybe their energy is a little weird or off and you don't want to walk by them. It's the same kind of thing. Just know this energetic stuff is there. They're not looking for you. They're not looking for you at all. They're looking for gateways in that are easy. So drug users who break down their defenses, that's like 99% of people I've worked with who have a history of drug use have a lot of dark energies that need to be cleared, and it's not easy getting them back out. So, and I'm talking about significant and severe drug use, not like, oh, I'm recreationally doing it at a rave. And that can happen too. But again, it's about mindfulness and knowing these energies do exist. We can go into more detail in another episode, but yeah, just know when they're coming around. But more of the energy vampires that we're dealing with are alive, and they're often related to us or they're our friends. So make boundaries. Choose specifically how much time and when you spend and where you spend with people. And then worry about the other energies. Okay, how can you keep the download, not forget it again? I write everything down. As a matter of fact, I don't even write everything down anymore. I use my voice recognizer on my phone. So I just put it on. I will either do an audio recording where I have, and then I put it into a translator, which will then, it's like dictation, it'll type it up. or I'll actually just text myself. I have a text string with myself, and I turn on my voice recognizer on my iPhone and I talk into it, and then I copy paste it into an email. I shoot it to my computer. I save it in a document, and I am going through the arduous task of trying to pull all that stuff together now. But I have Macs. I'm a Mac user. Mac has a dictation on it, so you can pretty much, Microsoft Word has dictation on it. That's my recommendation, and do it as quickly and as soon after your experience as you have it, because that is when it's in the most pure form. You're still kind of straddling the worlds a little bit, and your human brain will not start slotting in information to give you a more robust story. Thank you all. Let's see, can you share your thoughts on Bashar? I would definitely love to share my thoughts on Bashar. Not today, because we're running out of time. But it was fascinating. I got a text literally this morning that there's a conference in Sedona that he is in, that is January 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Unfortunately, at this moment, I can't make it because of previous engagement. But if you guys want to know about that, I'll shoot you the link. Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about him. I want to join the ranks of these people. Naomi, I know you had to go. I love you. Thank you. Can you give us a sneak preview for your upcoming book? Yes, all these experiences that I'm sharing, you're going to get the versions where they actually have all the details. Of course, I can't give you all the details, but when I write them down, I'm very, very explicit. My background, my degree is in English. I'm a writer. That's what I do. I write a travel column right now for a magazine, but I also write other things as well. So it'll be about, yeah, Walmart is everyone's nightmare. It's like spiritual practice when you go in. Sometimes in Hawaii, it's the only place you can find stuff, but delivery, love the delivery. Yeah, yes. Danielle, you feel everything as well. I know the sensitive people all have a lot of similarities that way. I feel you. Ezra related to so much I cannot take in those visuals or topics. Yeah, particularly horror. Takes you a minute to recharge or transmute. Yep. I'm doing better recently where it's like I can at least walk by a television or something and it's playing and I don't like get this jarring sensation with horror drug commercials. I feel the same about the screens at the pump. Yeah, seriously, who came up with that idea? Terrible. Yeah, constant bombarding. And they wonder why we're not reading anything these days, right? I say that in my own business, like my employees don't read my text messages. My employees don't read the emails. And I'm like, you kind of are getting overloaded. It makes a lot of sense. In ancient Hawaiian, these energy vampires are called malu. Yes. Frederick Dodson also talks about those opportunities and how easily we're giving them an opportunity to get, yes, to get their fix. Exactly. Clearing entities. I'm going to write that down. So it's in the chat if you're wondering what I'm reading. It's a book that Michelle is recommending from Frederick Dodson. Okay, we'll look that up. Yeah, yeah, we don't want to give them what they want, right? You can also just like, get out. Feel free to be aggressive if they're coming into your space. Can I talk about empathy and star seeds? So Sue, I'm gonna write that down for the next or another talk. Because I think it's related to a couple other topics I already have. For sure. So not today, but I will come back to that. Mustafa, thank you for coming. I know he's already gone. Do you think empaths are generally Arcturians? Sue, that's a great question. I do have a book that I can share with all of you that is an almanac of alien species according to this person's perspective. And I found a lot of accuracies in there, and I will show it to you in a minute. Thank you. I hope you do read my book. Okay, I'm going to pause just one second. I'm going to walk away to the bookshelf, which is right there, and I'm going to grab that book so I can give you the title. It's called The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac. Do you want a screenshot? The author's name is spelled Campobasso. Craig Campabasso. Campabasso. And I found this to be pretty accurate. I also would add a bunch of chapters to it myself. So where he kind of falls off on the species toward the end, reptilians, the dracs, lizards, any of the insectoids. There's a lot more information, but does a really wonderful job with a lot of the others. So read, and as I always say, take it with in your own filter and see what resonates with you and what doesn't. And it's okay to rewrite the information so that it works for you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Narina. Appreciate all of you for being here. All right. I think that's, we'll finish up there for today. 90 minutes, that's what I was aiming for.